Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to my October wrap up. October was simultaneously the fastest and slowest month of this whole year. I feel like it flew by, but then when I look down at the books that I was reading at the beginning of the month, I'm like, wait, that was still October? I don't know how we've made it to November already. We are so close to the end of the year, and I am personally very excited to be within Christmas season. But before that, let's talk about October because I did read a lot of spooky books this month. I also put out a lot of reading vlogs, so I will be referencing those throughout the video. Before I talk about the specific books that I read, let's talk about stats. In October, I read 21 books and had no DNFs. I also don't know how I've been managing 20 plus books the past few months, but I am here for it. It is making my reading vlog life so easy. Of those 21 books, 17 were for reading vlogs, so I will definitely talk about those and link those if you have not seen them already. And then only 4 books that I read this last month were not for videos and were just quote unquote for fun. As far as genres go that I read in October, the majority of the books that I read were in the mystery, thriller, horror category with 11 total books. Then the next highest genre was contemporary romance with 7. I also read 2 historical fiction books and 1 nonfiction book. As far as formats go, no surprise, I read the majority of my books via audio, even though I own most of them physically. I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, so 16 of the books were read via audio and 5 of the books were read completely physically. And let's talk about ratings for October. I had 1 1-star book, 4 2 stars, 9 3 stars, 6 4 stars, and 1 5-star book. That is a very satisfying normal distribution of ratings, so I enjoy that. And now let's get into the books. So like I mentioned, most of the books that I read were for reading vlogs. So those books I'm going to reference what video I talked about them already in. You can go watch those videos if you missed them and you want more of my in-depth thoughts about the books that I read. And in this video, I'm just gonna give a really quick synopsis, what I rated it, and keep the video moving. So the first video that I put out in October was my Bookathon reading vlog, which was a spooky middle grade readathon hosted by Keisha at A Book Like You, Gwen at Gwendolyn Kensinger, and Gabby at Gabbing About Books. I read 3 books that week. They are all, of course, spooky middle grade novels. The first one is called Small Spaces by Katherine Arden. This is about a middle school student who goes on a field trip to this spooky farm. Weird things start happening, and it also is connecting to a book that she has obtained. Like what happened in the book is pertaining to what's happening in real life. I did really enjoy this one. I gave it 4 stars. The only thing holding me back from a 5-star rating was that it gets a little bit out there at the end, a little bit speculative and crazy, which is kind of a theme you will see with a lot of the spooky and horror type books that I read this month. If they got weird, I didn't love them. This one I did really enjoy though, like I mentioned, gave it 4 stars. Then I read Ghost Squad by Claribel A. Ortega. This one is fully in the fantastical realm. It's about 2 friends who accidentally unleash like a spirit on their town and they have to try and contain it, and they work with one of the girls' grandmas who's a witch. Not really my type of story. I ended up giving it 2 stars. And then the last book that I read for that video is The Halloween Moon by Joseph Fink. This was the most up my alley. This is about a middle school student who wants to go trick-or-treating. She absolutely loves Halloween, but this year her parents are telling her she's too old. So of course she sneaks out and does it anyway. But while she is trick-or-treating, things are weird. People either aren't answering their doors, or when they are answering their doors, they're talking about how sleepy they are, even when it's just like 7 p.m. All of a sudden there's nobody else on the streets with her, so she has to figure out what's going on. I also gave this one 4 stars. Again, the ending gets a little weird for my personal taste, but it is all in good fun, and especially for a middle grade book, I thought it was really good. The next video that I put out in October is my Book of the Month reading vlog. This is a series I do on my channel almost every month. When I get Book of the Month books, I like to read them right away and get my thoughts out. For anyone else who might be a member and is considering picking these books up or adding them to a future box, the first book that I read for that video is called The Attic Child by Lola J. This is a historical fiction book about 2 different characters who live 75 years apart, and they were both trapped in this same attic as children, and it's all about finding out what happened to them, how their storylines interweave. I thought the story in here was great. I loved reading about it and seeing how it all kind of puzzle pieced together. I did think it was quite long. It felt long. The middle dragged a little for me, so I gave it 3 stars, but would still say I ultimately enjoyed it. Then I read The Most Likely Club by Alyssa Friedland. This is a contemporary book about this group of women who are getting ready for their 25-year high school reunion. They were friends in high school, they're friends now, and they're discussing where they are in their lives in relation to the superlatives they were assigned in high school, like most likely to work in the White House, most likely to cure cancer, you know, stuff like that. Their lives have not really worked out as they expected them to in high school, so now they're kind of making a pact to go for those superlatives. I was really hoping to enjoy this book. I love the messaging of like women's lives don't end once they turn 40, and we have a lot of value left to give to the world, and like female empowerment, all of that. This like touched the surface, but I wanted it to go way, way more. It ended up being surface level, gossipy, not my favorite, 2 stars. And then the last book I read for that video is The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. This is about a family who moves to Alaska because they are struggling. They've come upon hard times. The father struggles from PTSD and has some anger issues and struggles to keep employment, so they decide to move to this homestead in Alaska, start living off the land. And I really enjoyed this story. I did feel like I've read it before in other books, so it wasn't completely original in my eyes. So because of that, I couldn't give it 5 stars, but overall enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. Definitely lived up to the hype in my mind because a lot of people love Kristen Hanna and this book in particular. Okay, the next video that I put out in October is a Colleen Hoover reading vlog where I read her oldest release and compared it to her newest release. Her oldest book is called Slammed. It's a romance about this high school student. She's 18 years old. Her family has just moved to this new town. She falls in love with this 21-year-old guy and then finds out he's a teacher at her high school. So kind of taboo there. I thought this was fine. I gave it 3 stars. As part of that video, I also read the 2 sequels to that book called Point of Retreat and This Girl. Point of Retreat is a continuation of that first book. I didn't think it was a story that was wholly necessary. I didn't get much out of it, so I gave this one 2 stars. And then the second sequel, or the 3rd book in the series, is called This Girl. This book aggravated me so much. This is just a retelling of the first book from the guy's perspective. So it was so repetitive. It was the exact same story that I had just read. So many of the same conversations were had, and I don't understand why this is a trend for romance books, but I did not like it and I gave it 1 star. And like I said in that video, I compared that oldest release to Colleen Hoover's newest release, which is It Starts With Us. This is a sequel to a romance book that Colleen Hoover has written called It Ends With Us. I loved this book so much, and I actually also reread this book this month. This was my 5-star book. I gave it 5 stars the first time I read it. I gave it 5 stars the second time I read it. Loved it, and this is a continuation of that story. I thought this was really nice for what it was. It did not hit me as hard in the feels as It Ends With Us did, but it did still feel like there was still a story there to tell, and I liked where the direction of the story went. I love the characters in this book, so I ended up giving this one 4 stars. My next video was also an author spotlight video. I read all of Ashley Winstead's books. She has written 3 books so far. The first is called In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. This is a murder mystery book about a girl who, when she was in college, one of her best friends died. Someone was convicted of that, and now several years later, she's not sure that the mystery was actually correctly solved. So she's going back to her college reunion, she's going back to her friend group, trying to figure out what actually happened. It was okay. I gave it 3 stars. Ashley Winstead's second book that she published is called Fool Me Once, and it's a completely different vibe. This is a contemporary romance book that actually has a very, very heavy focus on politics. I found that very interesting and enjoyable. I actually liked that being included in this book. Some people don't, so if you don't like politics in your fiction, stay far away from this book, but I enjoyed it. The thing that I didn't enjoy in this book is the romance, and specifically the love interest. So that held me back from completely loving this book, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then the third book that I read for that video and Ashley Winstead's most recent release is The Last Housewife. This is a very dark, cult-related book about a woman who has a very mysterious past, went through something really traumatic in college. At the beginning of this book, we don't know what that is, but the main character finds out that one of her college friends has died. It was ruled by the police as a suicide, but she doesn't think that that is really the case based on what she knows about her friend and what she went through in her past. So this main character has to dig back up things about her past and try and figure out what happened to her dead friend. I enjoyed this book the most out of all of Ashley Winstead's books. I gave it 4 stars. Not a new favorite thriller, but definitely original. Very disturbing. Look up trigger warnings if you need them, but fascinating subject matter in here. And then the last video that I put out in October is a reading vlog over Halloween weekend. I read weird horror books. The first one was a young adult horror called The Woods Are Always Watching by Stephanie Perkins. This is about 2 friends who have just graduated high school. They decide to go on a 3-day backpacking and camping trip together before they part ways and go to college in different locations. The trip does not go as planned and it ends up being a survival story for them in the woods. This was entertaining enough. It was a super short and fast read, but at the end of the day it was nothing special, so I gave it 3 stars. Then in that video I read We Spread by Ian Reid. This is an adult horror book about the horrors of aging, losing your memory, losing your physical capabilities, and not being able to trust yourself and your perception of what is happening around you. I've seen so many people loving this book recently. I unfortunately did not love it. This book leaves a lot up to the reader's interpretation, and I personally prefer explanation and to know exactly what happened and why it happened. So I felt like I was left hanging a little bit, and I gave this book 3 stars. And then the last book I read for that video is The Honeys by Ryan LaSala. This is about our main character named Mars, who is gender fluid, but most often identifies as masculine and uses he/him pronouns. He has recently, at the start of this book, lost his twin sister. She died under mysterious circumstances, and so he wants to get to know a little bit more about her life and what happened to her. So he goes to this summer academy camp where his sister had spent a lot of her time before her death, and he gets to know her friend group. This book is very weird. What was happening at the camp is very weird. So I gave this one 3 stars for that reason, because the weird was just too weird for me. But I did really like our main character Mars and his exploration of himself and his gender identity and how that all played into the story. So I would recommend this book the most to people who like weird things, because it is a very interesting story at its core, and I think there are people who will really enjoy it. It just unfortunately is not me, and I gave it 3 stars. Now let's finally talk about the 4 books that I did not read for any videos on my channel and I have not shared my thoughts on already. First book that I read way back at the beginning of the month is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This is the first book by Grady Hendrix that I've ever read, so I didn't really know what I was getting into. I know a lot of my friends really enjoyed this book, so I was curious to know my thoughts, and I was hoping that I would also really enjoy it. This is about 2 best friends. At the beginning of the book, you get to know how they became best friends and what their relationship is like over the years. And then this book takes off when one of the friends is not acting like herself. She starts acting cold and distant, and the other best friend doesn't know why, so she tries to get to know what's going on. She tries to help her. In a shocking turn of events, there is an exorcism involved. I don't know why exactly this book didn't work for me. I think it's a combination of not being down for supernatural elements in books. It was just a little bit too out there for me, and also I didn't super connect with these 2 girls and their friendship. I think a lot of people who love this book, that is what they love about it, and maybe because I don't have a lot of super close female friendships in my life or something, I don't know, that just didn't really work for me. I wasn't super connected to it, so I wasn't connected to the story as a whole. So unfortunately, I gave this book 2 stars. Then I read a really interesting book called Before We Were Trans by Kit Hyam. This is a nonfiction book that was offered through Libro FM as part of their ALC program, where they give free audiobooks to book influencers, and I picked this one up because it looked like really interesting subject matter. It is all about trans history and how trans people and the definition of being trans has evolved over time, and how it's actually really hard to study trans history because there are so many changing definitions of what being trans is and reasons why people may or may not identify as trans, especially in different cultures and different periods of time, like war times. It was very interesting, but it did read a little bit like a textbook in how so much of it was talking about history and events of history. So I rated the book 3 stars, but if that is a topic that is interesting to you, I would definitely recommend it because it goes very in depth into this whole topic, and it's a very nuanced conversation, and I appreciate that, and I feel like I learned a lot, but I definitely still have a lot more to learn. And then this month I also read The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson, which is one of my most anticipated books of this entire year. Tiffany D. Jackson is one of my favorite authors, and this book in particular I was interested in because it is a Carrie retelling, specifically centered around this high school that is set in 2022, but they still have segregated proms, and that's a whole ordeal in itself about why they still do that. But this book follows the first year that they decide to have an integrated prom where Black and white students can go to the same prom at the same time, and I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I have read Carrie. I read it once in high school and I don't really remember what I thought about it at that time. And then I just also read it in September in preparation for this book. I really disliked the original book of Carrie, and I thought that this retelling improved upon it in every way. This book had really interesting commentary about race and class and segregation and privilege and everything that you would hope and expect a book like this would have. So I am really happy that it lived up to my expectations, and as always am excited and intrigued to see what Tiffany D. Jackson puts out next. And then the last book that I have to talk about that I read this month is In the Company of Witches by Oralee Wallace. I read this book because it is the monthly pick for the Cozy Hollow Book Club, which is a cozy mystery book club just recently started by my friends Lauren at Lauren Love Reads, Caitlin at Pride and Paperback, and Rachel at Happy Go Lovely Reads. They all love cozy mysteries and they want other people to start reading cozy mysteries. I have not read very many of them at all, so I was intrigued to pick this book up. And this was an interesting one to start with because it is magical. It includes witches. It is about this girl who lives with her 2 aunts. They own a bed and breakfast together. They are all witches and they have powers, but our main character has recently lost her powers because she experienced the death of her husband, and that put her just into like a state of depression and not wanting to deal with her magical powers anymore. And then there is a death that happens at the bed and breakfast, and our main character is being encouraged to get back into tune with her magical powers because they could help solve the mystery of this person's death. This book was fine. It was definitely entertaining. I liked our main character. Her relationship with her aunts was fun. I just don't love witchy things necessarily, and I also didn't find the mystery particularly interesting, and I wasn't all that invested in who done it. So my overall thoughts for this book are unfortunately 3 stars, but I did have a lot of fun talking about this in the monthly book discussion that they hosted on YouTube and talking about my thoughts on the book. And I am also excited to continue giving cozy mysteries a try because I do think it is a genre I could enjoy. I just think I will like realistic ones more than this supernatural one. So hopefully I find that to be true in future months of the Cozy Hollow Book Club. So that is officially all of the books that I read in October. Please let me know if you have read any of the books that I mentioned. What were your thoughts? And if you haven't read any of them, are any of them on your radar? Are you curious to pick any of them up? I feel like it was a pretty successful reading month, and I'm excited to carry that momentum into November and the rest of the year. But other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.